Okay, I think we're going to start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It's the second of a series of 3 sessions dedicated to the Net Zero Cities Pilot Cities Programme and the call for pilot cities that we are hosting this summer. We had a session last week on Monday. We are having one today, and the last one is planned for the 5th of September. This webinar is for both mission and non-mission cities. As the Net Zero Cities call for pilot cities is an open call under Horizon 2020 to which cities from the European Union and the H2020 associated countries can apply. Before we move to the webinar and the presentations, please allow me some housekeeping. So we are having a very short, max 5 minutes introduction, and then you'll be hearing presentations for around 40 minutes. Because we were trying to reserve as much time as possible for a long Q&A to take as many questions as possible. Please keep in mind that this webinar is being recorded. In order to not to disturb the speakers nor the audience, please use the Q&A functionality to ask questions. When you ask questions, please name or rename yourself and include the name of your department and your city. And just to refresh, you can find the Q&A in the bar at the bottom of your screen. You press it and then you can type your questions. You can receive answers there, and you can also vote up for questions that you think are relevant for your city and you'd like to be taken in the live Q&A. Content-wise, today we will cover the background of the Net Zero Cities Pilot Programme. We will explain what we are calling for, what is the scope of activities, remind you of the call timeline. We'll present the funding and budget requirements and share the criteria and talk about the review and selection process. Quite important, please note that the detailed information regarding the Pilot Cities Programme and the open call for pilots as presented today is subject to approval, still partly subject to approval, and may vary from the final version that we'll publish on the 5th of September. So please make sure before you start your application, read the most up-to-date call guidelines on the 5th of September. Therefore, the main purpose of this webinar is to facilitate an early ideation process to help you to develop your proposals and to enable a timely collaboration with relevant city departments and potential partners. Today, you will hear from my colleagues, Will Wade, designer and producer, innovation grant maker at EIT Climate Kick, and Sigrid Eiermann, EU Project Delivery Officer at EIT Urban Mobility. We have also today with us in the backstage, Tom Haddock moderating the Q&A and Barbara Yarkiewicz providing tech support. My name is Joanna Kielinska-Alavena. I'm a team orchestrator with EIT Climate Kick and Cities Lead for Net Zero Cities, and I have the pleasure to facilitate today's session. Now, without further ado, I hope Will can guide us through the Pilot Cities Programme. Will, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Joanna, I'm going to check that everyone can hear me okay. Yes, he nods. Good. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. As Joanna's outlined, we're going to do a bit of a recap, if for those who weren't there on last week's webinar, on some of the background of the programme and the way it's set up, before going into some of the more detail around the requirements and the assessment selection process. So we're pitching this as how is this different? This is different to what you might normally experience on a Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation call. And this is the list here of the eligible activities which you will see are in the call guidelines. So that, and just to sort of clarify, eligible activities refer to what activities you program in your pilot activities that are eligible to receive funding for. So the first of these is the deployment of innovative, new or improved technologies, services, processes and solutions. Governance model at city level explored in a cross-sectoral and systemic manner. So those are the important keywords there, cross-sectoral and systemic manner. Systemic innovative initiatives that strengthen cities' use of scientific research and ensure translation into policy actions, paying attention to the do no significant harm principle. There might be also activities to support climate neutrality, to establish new knowledge and build capacity and capabilities at city government level and with associated actors through training and workshops. And also aiming at building more collaborative communities to advance new governance models at city level, engaging citizens, and enabling climate change actions in a systemic and cross-sectoral manner. Just a really important note is that your pilot activities may cover and include activities of several of these, but not necessarily all of them or any one of them alone. So this is just a list of eligible activities that you can program into your pilot. But you don't need to cover all of them or pick just one of them. So the application process and the way that you will start to conceive of your pilot proposal is focused on understanding your barriers, your main challenges at city level, and understanding your mandates to be able to tackle and act upon them. And you will start doing some thinking around specifying solutions, innovations to deploy, but it won't necessarily be finalized. There will be a period of time that you can co-create with us and have some time and space post-selection to look at what possible solutions and innovation actions you want to deploy in the pilot activities themselves. There is a heavy focus on shared learning, capacity building, capability building within the city, but also across Europe, across the cohorts of pilots, rather than just focusing in on your own. This question came at the last webinar. There isn't any particular technology readiness level or TRL either before the activities are planned and deployed or by the end of them. So this is not focusing on technology readiness level at all. So it's also a different program because it's not just about grant support and financial support. It's also about pilot cities receiving support from city advisors who will be assigned to the successful pilots. There's a city expert support facility. You can find some more information about that in the Pilot Cities Programme Guidebook, which was published a couple of weeks ago, which is about targeted support for individual pilot cities as defined with their city advisor during the delivery of the programme. There is support for monitoring and evaluation, and also some dedicated support to building your financial capabilities and capacity at city level, thinking into the future about how to finance the transformation and all of the things that cities will need to do to be carbon neutral in the timelines and horizons that we have. There's also learning as a programmatic element and support for sense making at the pilot level, but also across the cohort. There's cross-fertilization of learning that's planning to take place as well, and in particular through the peer learning program or city learning program, as you'll see in the guidebook and referenced elsewhere. Just a very important point there in the red text, the city advisors will not be able to support you directly with your application to the Pilot Cities Programme, because this will represent a conflict of interest or unfair and biased advantage for those mission cities where the non-mission cities can also apply to this call. So who can apply? Well, EU mission cities and non-mission cities, as Joanna has said, that's really important to reinforce. Both EU cities and Horizon 2020 associated country cities. The consortium partners may include local authorities, city administrations, and other local partners such as research institutions, universities, SMEs, NGOs, citizen groups, or other relevant stakeholders. Groups of cities may also apply together, national or transnational, but they will have to have at least one city designated as the consortium leader. The logic behind this joint application will be explained in a dedicated question in the call form itself, and we'll obviously have to then flow through to the remainder of the questions that are asked in the call form so that we can see how that logic carries through the planned pilot programme. And there's more information about this in the eligibility criterion as well. So this is just a reminder of the timeline that many of you would have seen last week as well. The Pilot Cities Guidebook and the guidelines are now launched. We have the first webinar last week, which was more on the kind of overall program and approach that we're taking. Today's focus is about the criteria for selection and funding guidelines. And then we will have another one on the 5th of September, focusing on the technical requirements, in particular, how to access and submit your proposal. So between June and October, we will be regularly publishing and updating and frequently asked questions. So we have many from last week, and we'll have, I'm sure, many from today as well, and we'll make sure that they are publicly available and continuously updated. The call will launch on the 5th of September and will close on the 4th of November at 1 minute to midnight CET. The proposal review and selection process will run between November and January 2023. And the decision communication is anticipated the 28th of February 2023. Contract development will then follow that with those selected pilot cities, and we will be publishing the outcomes of the call shortly after that in March as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sigrid now, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we're now talking a little bit about funding and budget requirements. So the maximum amount of budget available is 32 million euro for approximately 30 grants. The ratio or the distribution of awards that we're anticipating is about 12 grants of 1.5 million euro, 10 grants at 1 million euro, and 8 grants at 0.5 million euro. As Will has just mentioned, the group of cities is also allowed to apply together, but you have to note that the maximum funding limit is still 1.5 million. So we can't change that maximum amount per application. The aim of that distribution of the grants for the pilot cities is that we have a differing size of cities and that we also reflect different starting points for cities on their transition to climate neutrality. The size and number of grants may vary though, and that's depending on the types of profiles of proposals we receive and the ratio of grants that is requested by the applicants. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So regarding the budget requirements, more detailed information will be available on September 5th when the call will open, but we anticipate that the eligible costs will follow the H2020 financial guidelines with the following 2 cost categories. So there's the direct costs that include the actually incurred, identifiable and verifiable costs, and they will have to be recorded in the account. So there will have to be invoices for this. This can include, for example, personal costs or travel and subsistence, also equipment and other purchases, as well as subcontracting. Then the other cost category are the indirect costs. So these are costs based on a flat rate, which will be 25% calculated on the direct costs. But you have to note this will be calculated on the personal costs and purchase costs only. So the subcontracted will not include it in that. But you will know there's no need for supporting evidence for this cost category. And of course, all the budgeted costs in your proposal have to align with your national and institutional policies and practices. There will be a few special budget features in this call, and that's considering the special features we have in the Net Zero Cities Pilot Programme that Will has just presented. So therefore, the applicants should include necessary resources and person months in their work plans and budgets, and they have to allow for the following activities. And we have sense making, so you will need a dedicated person for sense making and cross-fertilization activities. This is to facilitate, for example, the participation of city officials and relevant stakeholders in these activities. And you need a specific amount of person months dedicated to these activities. This will be detailed further in the core guidelines. Then we also have the learning activities. So if you read through the guidebook, you will know that there is also a mentoring requirement for the twin cities or the peer cities. So you will have to allow for 2 to 3 mentoring visits to your peer city, and you will also have to host your peer city in your city. And there will have to be an allowance for some ongoing monthly work online with your peer city. We also have the future financing and financial sustainability. So this is a sort of an extra work area to allow the cities to acquire the capabilities that they need for long-term sustainability and to replicate their pilot activities. And then, of course, there is communications and media activities. So you would have to ensure that your pilot activities are included in your communications and media programming and to promote the results and the impact of your activities. Lastly, we would like to also note that regarding the financial management and audit, if your grant is over a threshold of 430,000 euro, you will be required to undertake a financial audit and provide the certificate of this audit. And yes, this is from me, from this side, just the budget and funding requirements.
Thanks, Sigrid. So I'm going to move now into the three-stage process that we've profiled before around the review and selection. So yeah, there are three stages to the selection process. The first one is eligibility, which is effectively, are you able to be part of this program? And they are a list of 8 pass-fail requirements and that will be reviewed first as soon as the deadline is closed. Proposals must pass all of these eligibility criteria to then be considered to go to stage 2. Stage 2 is assessment of the quality, and that is scores against individual assessment criteria by at least 2 independent external reviewers. And there are, as you'll see momentarily, specific threshold points for each of the grouped 3 areas of categories. And there's also, I believe, 3 specific criteria where there is an individual threshold that needs to be met to be then considered to move to stage 3. The importance here of that stage 3 being a threshold-based process as opposed to being ultimately a scoring and then X number or X percentage go through is that in the strategic selection process, we will be selecting up to 30 or around approximately 30 pilot cities, but based on a range of contextual criteria and diversity criteria, which we'll show you momentarily as well. So to ensure that we are enabling the ability to select a portfolio of pilot cities across a range of diversity criteria, we therefore need to ensure there is a range of diversity that comes through the assessment process. Hence, there is a threshold of quality rather than an ultimate ranking. So eligibility. The first one is that there is only 1 application per city or district, and that is also in the case of multi-city applications. So to be clear on that, the city must only appear in 1 proposal and should not appear in any more than 1 proposal. This one is in red because it's one of those items that Joanna mentioned before is still subject to formal approval. But the population size for a city must be over 50,000 inhabitants. However, there are some exceptions to this. So for cities from countries with less than 5 cities of more than 100,000 inhabitants, that's a bit complicated, so hopefully to read that a few times. This population threshold is actually down to 10,000. So a city can have 10,000 inhabitants and still be eligible. However, only in the case where the full proposal represents at least 50,000 inhabitants. So to illustrate that, that would mean if there are several smaller cities that want to come together or connect up with a couple of larger ones, that therefore the proposal represents as a whole over 50,000 inhabitants, but may contain 1 or 2 smaller cities or 5 smaller cities, for example, of 10,000 inhabitants. Yeah, so just to note that this eligibility criterion is currently awaiting formal approval, which will be part of a grant amendment process for the Net Zero Cities project, but it will be finalised and communicated by that 5th of September launch date. So cities and districts must be from EU member states or approved Horizon 2020 associated countries. There must be at least 2 partnering organisations or legal entities, one of which must be the city or city administration leading the proposal within the specified district or city, and the other one being a separate independent legal entity, so independent from the city, i.e. there at least being 2 legal entities. As I said, the application must be led by the city administration or district administration, and must be accompanied by a letter of support from a mayor or city official mandated to sign on behalf of the city mayor or city council or equivalent at district level. We will be looking to provide a pro forma template for that to make things easier, and that will be launched in due course. The maximum allocation of budget per individual partner or legal entity is 2/3 of the total grant requested. So just to be clear on that, if there are 2 organisations in the consortium, then one of those organisations can only have a maximum of 2/3 of the entire grant request, and the remainder must be that other legal entity, or if there are several more, then shared between them. And also, we will be asking for a list of stakeholders already engaged or to be engaged to be provided at the proposal stage, and that's an eligibility criterion, so please do ensure to include that. Not a strict eligibility criterion, but you will be asked to declare that you will participate in the City Learning Programme. So as Sigrid mentioned, the twinning peer mentoring programme that's part of the whole setup. at the point of submission of your proposal. So stage 2, assessment criteria. The assessment criteria, which I'll go into in a second individually, or not in too much detail, but at least I'll show these to you, are grouped into 3 areas. That is the mandate to act, the capacity to act, and then impact. Each individual criterion underneath these groupings is scored between 0 and 5 by at least 2 independent external experts. And the score across all of these categories, as you can see, is a total available of 115 points. And there is a threshold as well, which I'll show to you in a moment. As you can see also, it's important to note there that with the threshold, so a minimum of 21 points for mandate to act, for example, and capacity to act is also 21 points, and then impact 27. In the first 2 categories, there are also some individual criteria that have a minimum score requirement. So 6 points being scored against the understanding the problem criteria space, and at least 3 points scored against orienting to solutions, and then the same for cross-cutting considerations and the capacity to act. This is a scoring table. I don't want to dwell on it too much. I think you'll probably all be very familiar with this, as it's a relatively standard one across research and innovation frameworks. But yeah, well, you'll see that in the core guidelines. So mandate to act, as I say, I won't read through these individually, but I will just quickly highlight them. So there is 5 points available for net zero carbon emissions ambition. And this is probably a slightly different criteria compared to the others, because we are offering 5 points for a demonstrated and formalized 2030 ambition, 2 points for a formalized and demonstrated ambition between 2031 and 2050, and then no points available for anything that is beyond 2050, or indeed no formalized ambition at the city level or district level. Mandate to act then covers the city's overarching vision for climate neutrality, and the level of and strength of political supports and relationship of the pilot activities to the city's programming and budgeting. Understanding the problem. As I say, that this call is very much focusing on cities demonstrating their knowledge and understanding of their own challenges and problems. So there's 10 points available here. 1 for looking at the relevant emissions domains that are relevant to your city that you will be looking to tackle or make interventions into and headway into in your pilot activities. And the other one is identifying some of the systemic barriers and or opportunities to tackling these relevant emissions domains as well. There is a smaller amount of points available for orienting to innovative and systemic solutions. So as I said before, it's not about this stage of the proposal knowing exactly what interventions, what products, services, innovation, solutions that you will be deploying and how they will work, but having an understanding of what might be the kinds of interventions you want to make, how they relate to the particular emissions domains that you've identified, and or the particular challenges and barriers that you have also outlined in the previous section. But as I said, the Net Zero Cities Programme team will work with the selected pilots following selection to start to refine and think about those solutions to deploy and those innovation actions to undertake in your pilot activities over the two-year period. Capacity Acts focuses on collaboration and engagement. So we'll be looking at the relevant stakeholders that you've brought with your application and identified to work with you and through that 2-year period, but also where relevant, how citizens will be engaged at the relevant stages of the pilot activities. The cross-cutting consideration. So as I mentioned, this is one of the ones which is has an individual threshold of 3 points required. And that's about understanding and thinking about how the pilot activities are accounting for issues around diversity, inclusion, gender, accessibility, and just transition. And that's not just thinking about, but also having a credible plan for how to monitor and evaluate against those concerns and those thoughts throughout the 2 years of the pilot. Capacity and capability refers to effectively how the city will lead the pilot activities, how it will have representation from across city departments, different types of roles and capabilities needed to actually deploy the activities, but also thinking about where the capability gaps are or the capacity gaps are within the city. So we refer here to a learning assessment plan, which we'll be asking you to provide. So have a look at what needs will be need to be met throughout the 2 years and how you intend to do that and take that beyond the life of the programme. Finally, we have the soundness of the work plan. So that is, we'll be asking you for a high-level work plan, including key milestones and also any where the grant funding doesn't necessarily cover the entirety of the costs of the pilot activities. We'll be asking you to demonstrate a coherent plan for how you intend to secure additional resources, whether that's from the city or from co-financiers, to fully implement the pilot activities within that 24-month period. And finally, just a very standard one with the budget is clearly outlined and is justified and reflects value for money. Finally, we have impact. So the first of these is we are, as I said at the top of the presentation, learning learning is a key part of this programme. So we will be assessing how you intend to govern the activities, but ensure that learning and reflection is a core part of that governance, which includes both the mechanisms for how you learn through the pilot activities, but also who is at the table for that, which stakeholders are involved, how you're promoting learning and reflection, and how this is ensuring transparency and accountability of the pilot itself. The pilot activities direct impacts and scalability refers to the indicators that you will identify and that you will define for the intended outcomes and impacts, and then how you intend to monitor that, so how measure. You'll be outlining substantive direct impacts that the pilot activities will aim to have on city level emissions, but obviously as a proportion of the city's overall emissions profile. So acknowledging that your pilot activities will not be able to tackle all of your city emissions and emissions domains. So this is understood as a proportion of those, depending on which emissions domains you're looking to tackle and have an impact upon. You'll also be asked to outline how the pilot activities could be scaled, and including the impact that scaling would have citywide. And then thinking ahead to the future around how learning through your pilot activities will be captured and disseminated to support transferability or replication across the EU. Indirect impacts, the final category here, refers to a range of co-benefits that you'll aim to identify and link directly to the pilot activities. How this pilot activities overall links to the vision for how the city will effectively decarbonise itself by the specified ambition date that you've identified in the proposal. But also obviously thinking about what kinds of risks are related to the activities you're undertaking and how you will mitigate and monitor these, also as they relate to co-benefits throughout the 2 years. So that is the criteria for assessment, which brings us to the final stage. And just to reiterate, the assessment criteria is looking for a threshold based on those 3 different areas and a few individual criteria. And if the proposal meets that threshold, then it will be taken through to the selection stage here. The selection stage will have a committee made up of 2 members of the Net Zero Cities Executive Committee, the coordinator of Net Zero Cities, and the addition potentially of an or multiple external independent observers, likely to be European Commission staff or external. This stage represents a contextual judgment that considers and prioritises a portfolio of pilot cities, and it will be taken consideration of. And this is where that diversity criteria comes in, and it's really important to note that we'll be looking to make a portfolio of approximately 30 cities that really does try to advance our understanding about decarbonising cities across Europe in different geographic regions. So we have the geographic diversity and an EU dimension, but also looking at different city sizes. And then clearly we'll need to have a diversity of types of emissions domains that are looking to be tackled, the kinds of challenges and barriers that are looking to be tackled, and of course the intended levers for change that you will be testing and solutions that you will be testing and innovating with over that 2 years. So that represents the diversity of the portfolio we're aiming to have. The score in the quality assessment stage will obviously be a deciding factor where this portfolio is being constructed. But in the event that we have effectively a standoff between 2 or more proposals having satisfied or having been included in that portfolio of cities based on the 4 bullet points, then we will go down to a second level of arbitrating between them. The first one is looking at whichever scores highest in the impact grouping criteria. And then if needed, the second level will be the overall score on the cross-cutting considerations individual criterion. Finally, decision communication. So we will be looking to communicate the final outcomes by the 28th of February 2023. The communication will include and indicate the grant allocation and state the cost eligibility period. The list of selected projects with a description of their actions, grant amounts, and the legal names of those grant recipients and their country, date of award, and the duration will be published on the Net Zero Cities website and platform. And then contract development after selection is expected to continue into March, where we will sort of help to refine and respond to any particular feedback. And as I said before, work with you to think about which solutions, which levers you want to test over that 2-year period. I believe that is the last slide. Yes, it is. So we're into the Q&A now.
Great. Thanks for that, Will. Thanks for that presentation and providing all the information. So we'll now move into the Q&A section. I can see that we've got 4 questions so far, so we'll start by running through these. We're also just going to share the link to the guidelines in the chat as well, so we can refer to these, and it may bring out a few more questions. So 1 second.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, we purposely left in the Q&A questions referring to the learning program, and I think you can cover part of it about the Twin Cities, and maybe Will could add to that from the Pilot Cities perspective, because apparently this is still not very clear, which I totally understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. It was raised that for some following the presentation, it was quite difficult to understand Will's accent. And just to say that we appreciate that we've got people from all over Europe with multiple languages, and we will be sharing the recording of this presentation, and also all of the information that's been presented here is going to be within the information within the guidelines that we've just linked in the chat. Within the Q&A as well, we'll also be tracking the conversations from the Q&A in this session and in the last session, and they will feed into an FAQ. So we should have multiple written resources where you'll be able to refer back to if there's any area that you didn't quite understand in the presentation we just had. So moving on to the Q&A now, I can see that the top question is, do we choose our twin cities ourselves, or are they appointed for us? So I'll start off by answering this and maybe then see if Will or Joanna or Sigrid would like to add anything else. But the call for the twins is going out in early June 2023, so next year, and they're still just finalizing the guidelines for that call. But what I can say is that there will definitely be opportunities to take advantage of existing relationships. However, they will also be looking at the areas of crossover of thematic areas where cities are focusing on a similar thematic area or a similar project or have a similar feature, such as a port. Then there'll be an endeavor to try and link up those cities. But there's also a desire to facilitate new and valuable relationships across the EU and the member states. So I think it'll most likely be a mixture of both, but that's still just to be firmly defined, and then that will be communicated with you as we move through to the end of the year. Will or Joanna, would you like to add anything to that? Okay.
Did you respond to the question on whether they choose them themselves, or sorry, I didn't catch that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we're saying, do we choose our twins ourselves, or is it they're appointed for us? So they will. It'll be a bit of. It won't be so much you'll be able to pick the twins that you want. You won't be able to say I want to have, as far as it currently stands, have this twin, this twin, this twin. But it'll be a collaborative process of identifying where there's crossover in relationships, thematic areas. So it'll be a bit of a collaborative process in how the twins are appointed. Okay, so moving on to the next question then. So we've got one here. Could you please elaborate more on the learning program for cities? I think this was in one of the slides, Will, in the presentation.
Well, I mean, the city learning program is the twinning program, and that is the details of that and how it will run are still to be decided. It won't launch until, I believe, later on, actually after the pilot cities are selected. So I don't know if there's much information we can give now about that. Joanna, is there anything in particular? I mean, I know Sigrid mentioned that there would be various visits between the twin cities and the main pilot cities. And there'll be some online work in between, sort of a small amount of that. But I don't think we have more information beyond that, other than it's a relationship of learning, mentoring, and sort of tracking pilot activities in particular cities to support those twin cities and thinking about how they might go about similar work or the same work, and maybe even do it alongside the pilot cities themselves.
Great, thanks, Will. So move on to the next question here from Dunkirk about the population eligibility criteria. If the city has more than 50,000 inhabitants, but the application to the call focuses mainly on a district with less than 50,000 inhabitants, is it okay? This might be one for you, Joanna.
Yes, of course, I take this one. I'm afraid this is a little bit delicate in the sense of impact. We have a threshold are 50,000 inhabitants, and we'll mention this. We're still working on some exceptions, but technically we should not have applications representing less than 50,000 inhabitants. This is why we suggest cooperations. We open proposals to groups of cities because we have to keep this at a certain level of impact. So please, I assume you're focusing on one district, but I suggest that you perhaps connect this district to another one in your city, or maybe in a different city, to make sure you fulfill this criterion.
Thanks, Joanna. So I've got a question here. This is, sorry, I can't see all the slides that are being displayed in the document linked. So the slides for this presentation haven't been shared yet, but we'll share them shortly after the webinar finishes. In the link that was put in the chat, there you can find the link to the draft call guidelines that we were presented on in the previous slides. But we'll follow up with the recording and the slides shortly after the webinar. So here a question. So as understood, costs cannot be claimed for infrastructure. Is that correct? Would that be to you, Joanna?
I try.
Oh.
We will publish specific financial guidelines at the call launch on the 5th of September. So this is part of what we are trying yet to figure out in details, but it also depends on what is meant by infrastructure. In any case, it's not funding for infrastructure, so you're not going to build roads or bridges with it. And as for equipment, for instance, I don't know, PV panels, it's an equipment, so it's eligible. You can also have nature-based solutions. It's usually service because you outsource this. So it's really hard to answer these questions without knowing what infrastructure is exactly in at this point, but we may not have infrastructure as such, which shouldn't limit your activities. But we're still debating this. So please, if you have some specific requests, you have in our email in the chat, present your situation, and then you will be able to answer more precisely.
Great. So moving on then. So is the program aiming to implement market solutions or pre-commercial solutions at the city level?
Will, are you taking this one?
I can try, but please do then. In theory, it could be either. I mean, we're not being prescriptive about necessarily what interventions or solutions or the likes that you do implement during the pilot activities. That said, there is clearly a huge amount of huge amount of opportunity to exploit RNI funded solutions from the European Union over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And we'll be providing a range of resources and case studies and the likes around these types of things, but we're not being prescriptive about specifically them being market solutions or pre-market. It would just be primarily dependent on what it is you need to test, what challenges you face, what's available to you to tackle those challenges. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Don't know if there's anything to add, Joanna or Sigrid?
Maybe, if I may, I think we tried to address this last week. We really would like you to focus on the barriers and on the problems and what stops you from moving forward, not necessarily on a technical field. Please do not jump into solutions before you go through the reflection on what is really needed, what is a huge barrier for your city on your pathway to climate neutrality, to decarbonization. This is why we are trying to have this call different from the standard H2020 calls. We want you to use solutions or pre-market solutions or pre-commercial solutions. But first, to make sure that this is exactly what you need, because you may need to change your approach, because maybe this is not a solution to your problem, maybe this is not the real problem. So I want to emphasize here that what is important, and when you spend some time reading the criteria again, you'll see we are assessing your awareness and your readiness to act, not necessarily the solutions that you're willing to implement.
Great, thank you. So the next question, I think we've pretty much answered this in the last two questions, but I'll put this out just in case you want to add, otherwise we can move on. But what kind of costs will be eligible? Operating and investment costs, or only operating costs? Will it be, for instance, possible to finance technical equipment or other investments? Is there anything you'd like to add that you haven't said in the last two questions?
Sigrid?
Yes, as we said, like purchase costs are included in the eligible costs as well. In the direct costs, you of course need to keep the invoice and need to be accounted for. But if you go to H2020 financial guidelines, you can more or less see what kind of eligible costs will be included in this call as well.
Great.
And we will be publishing some, as I say, the financial guidelines for the 5th of September, which will give you more direct guidance on this.
Yes, there will be a separate document associated with the call guidelines.
Okay, and here's a question that is co-financing required from the partners?
No.
No.
A nice easy one. Okay, so I think we've got another question here on what type of pilots we could use for the money, but I think we've kind of dealt with that. And then we've got, yes?
No, I just wanted to add, I know that it's extremely fresh. We only published the guidebook a week ago. We are publishing the guidelines today. But the main message we're having here, we do not want to be prescriptive. We want you to help you address your real barriers issues. So please go and read these two documents and come back to us. We will obviously publish the FAQs, but please come back to us. You have our email address. We'll be having Q&A sessions if necessary, but to help you understand it if it's not clear. But please use these documents. They are meant to be useful for you, and this is why they're out there. 2 months ahead, And or maybe this is the right moment also to clarify something. Usually this level of details is shared when the call is launched. We're doing something totally unprecedented. We are talking to you 2 months ahead of the launch of the call, just to make sure you have time to talk to us, you have time to think about it, and understand this difference and how we want to help you. Use this opportunity because I don't know when the next one will come. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Joanna. And thanks for clarifying. I think that's a key point in the fact that, we've got this 2 months in advance, and we're really looking at those solutions that are going to be the best for your city, and that's why they haven't been prescriptive. So thanks for delving deep into that, Joanna. So the next question we've got then is the City of Stockholm. Can 2 partners be 2 cities, or should the second partner be another organization than a city?
It can be the mix that you need to make it relevant for you.
Just to add to that, obviously there is a specific criterion on collaboration and engagement, and asking about which stakeholders in your cities are engaged. So whether or not represented in the budget, these additional stakeholders, you will still need to identify which stakeholders at city level you are aiming to work with and how.
And I guess you maybe touched on this in the answer you just gave then, and this, I guess, kind of builds on it. If several cities are making applications together, does the consortium still need to include other legally separate organizations within the cities?
I think we'll address partly this. So we need at least 2 entities in an application, and it's an eligibility criterion. So the entire budget doesn't go to one legal entity. So having more cities already applying together already covers this. But we have an assessment criterion referring to other stakeholders that are needed to properly address the issue that the pilot activities will try to tackle. I can see a comment to this question. Someone says that it's confusing because the cities are not applying with twins, but we can apply with other cities. Very confusing messaging. I'm sorry. Applying together means applying as pilot cities. So if you're a group of 3 cities or 4 cities applying together, each city will be considered as a pilot city, not only receiving grant funding, but also receiving the entire support that was presented last week and today, support of city advisors, access to the city expert support facility, support in sense making, in monitoring and evaluation, etc. Twin cities are not going to receive all this support. They will work only with city advisors, and they will receive funding for their twin activities. So this is the big difference. All the cities applying alone or together to the open call for pilot cities will be considered as pilot cities. I hope this is clear.
Yeah, and this is something that was built into the call for pilots and the pilot program to cater for a number of requests we had for cities to apply together within as a pilot consortium. So there's a very big difference between the pilots and then the twins, as Joanna just explained. Would anyone like to add anything else to that before we move on? Okay, let's move on. So Maria, I've seen a couple of times you put in the question for the presentation. If that's the link for this presentation, we'll be sharing it shortly afterwards. I'll resend the link to the last presentation in case that's the one you're referring to, and I'll put that in the chat. Okay, so let's just move on then. I'm not sure I quite get the question here. There's independence from the city separate budget. if City Finance is shareholder of the entity, is it eligible? I think if we could ask for that question to be clarified, if you could just explain that question a bit more in the chat, we'll come back to it, please. Then we'll move on to the next one. In the case that a consortium of cities is a net zero city winner and has indicated a challenge, how will the technical solutions be chosen? Will there be a tender for this solution? Again, I'm not quite sure what the question is asking that. I guess it's saying that if a consortium is selected as a pilot, how will the technical solutions be chosen?
Tom, let me try to address these two. If I understand correctly, the one on the independence from the city separate budget, I think I understand what you are referring to. For instance, the municipality being shareholder in the local airport, for instance. Yes, these entities having different separate mandate to act, they having different legal entities can apply together. An entity depending of the municipality not having a legal entity or not having a separate budget, so being directly funded through the municipal budget, expenses or wages are paid directly from the cities, that in this case, this entity is not allowed to apply together. It's considered as municipality. So I hope it helps. And in the case that a consortium of cities and net zero cities winner and has indicated a challenge, how will when I said please do not jump to solutions, it doesn't mean that you cannot think about it. We are not going to tender for your solutions. You may stop your thinking and design of your pilot activities at a level that would require you to procure a solution afterwards and focus, for instance, on governance in a broader context or citizens engagement or a totally new approach. But no, we are not going to tender for solutions. If you want to implement a solution as part of your pilot activities, then you have to consider this in your application.
Great, thanks, Joanna. So move on to the next question then. If one city applies as a pilot city but does not get selected, can it apply as a twin city later on?
Yes.
Yes.
If it meets the eligibility criteria, yeah, sure, of that call.
Yeah, which is yet to be designed, of course.
Okay. So here's a good question. I think we've touched on a bit, but maybe we can expand with this one. So for Brussels, we're a consortium already because the region of Brussels capital applied with its municipalities. So if the 13 municipalities apply, do we need another external legal entity?
I'm afraid you do, because you are one city, you're a mission city, so you are one city because you are a region. So it's like metropoles in France. You are a different level of governance, but you are one region. So you do need a partner. I'm afraid, and if I may allow myself some time for a comment here, maybe to helping to clarify. Well, Sigrid, help me if I'm not clear. In our views, you are not able to properly achieve your pilot activities without having right stakeholders engaged. The only thing we are thinking about saying you need a different entity, it's more about the budget. So it's like, it's to say you need someone else because you cannot get the entire budget, because you cannot do this alone. And we put this threshold at 2/3. But honestly, I suppose, and it's not only to fulfill assessment criteria, but just to make it work, you would need different partners to come and work with you. Otherwise, it might not be a proposal good enough to be selected for net zero cities. I don't know, Will or Sigrid, if you want to add to that, or maybe you, Tom.
I think you're right. Remember, there's two aspects to this across the two stages. There's eligibility, which is the pass fail, yes, no, and as Joanna's outlined, there is a reason why we have this 2/3 maximum for any one individual legal entity. But also there is the assessment criteria on collaboration and engagement, and you'll see from that and from the guidebook itself how much we are emphasizing, as Joanna says, that this needs to be a collaborative, stakeholder engaged effort. And that is effectively the kind of methodological and philosophical approach in a way of net zero cities and our approach to systems change and systems transformation. So that's the leading reason for this. And I would probably suggest focusing on that, the need for the assessment, than whether or not it's just trying to tick an eligibility box, which you obviously do need to tick, otherwise you're not eligible. But the emphasis should be on the thinking around who do you need involved in this particular set of pilot activities, trying to tackle this particular challenge in this area of the city's emissions domains, to show that your thinking is deep and it is wide and it is including the types of actors that you will need to have the impact and the speed of impact that we need as a program, as a continent.
Great, thanks. So moving on, this is a good question. Are the partners of Net Zero City able to be partners of the consortiums of the proposals for the school?
No, they cannot. In any case, we've mentioned the City Expert Support Facility, which is a name, like a complicated name, designing our own partners, the partners to net zero cities, bringing expertise and knowledge. So they will work with you from the inside. So to avoid double funding for these organizations, because they will be already paid by us, they cannot be partnered to the applications.
And I think we've answered this one already, but just in case I missed it. So is co-financing required from the partners?
No, no co-funding is required for that goal.
Okay. Can the two cities be from the same country?
Yes, absolutely. But they can be from two different countries as well.
Here's a good question from Cork. Are cities required to select their choice of the 1.51 or 0.5 million grants, or will this be allocated based on the merits of the application?
The city select the envelope they go for, and I would like also to emphasize it's an envelope. It's not a lump sum as understood by Horizon 2020. It's just an envelope, and this envelope should be relevant to the size of your city, your location, the type of your activities. Applying for the biggest one may not necessarily be the best choice. So because we'll be also assessing the relevance of the envelopes you're applying for, and as value for money of your application. But it's, yes, it's we are not granting as merit awards. You select the envelope you're going for.
So I think this next question, there's been a bit of a confusion around what it means about Net Zero Cities partners being part of the consortium and what it means from the actual support that we're going to give, this pilot cities will get from Net Zero Cities as a consortium itself. So I'll just read out the question. I don't quite understand your answer. It's not clear if you say on the one hand that the city should not jump into a solution and focus only on challenges, and on the other hand said that net zero cities will not help in selecting the relevant technical solution.
Yes, I didn't say that. I said that we are not going to procure the solutions for you. But if your pilot activities, and I'm really trying to not to give examples, not to point you to a direction that might not be good for your city. But let's say that you have a big barrier to address that would require engaging citizens and stakeholders, would require a change in the governance, and finally would require a technical solution to be used. And you decide in this application to describe it all, but select a bit relative to a new governance model. Then we will work with you to identify the solution you need, but we will not procure the solution for you. I hope it's clear now.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. So again, so this one we have touched on this a couple of times now, but I can see it's got 4 likes. So I'll put it out again and we can try and just see if we can clear it up. So just to be clear, cities don't need to allocate financing for the pilot activities, and grant can cover 100% of the planned cost of the activities. Yes. Okay, hopefully that's clear for everyone now. So that brings us to the end of the questions we've got within the Q&A. Please, we do have more time, so if you've got more questions, feel free to add them. I see that we do have one attendee with the hand up. We could, if that's Ruan Monstad, would you like to ask a question? I can allow you to do so. It's gone down. Okay. In which case, we'll just give a couple more minutes if anyone's got any other questions. Otherwise, we can move to wrap up.
So on this one.
Yes. Okay, I can open the floor. I think we did touch on that slightly, but maybe we can open the floor again just to really clarify that question. So again, I think, Joanna, you did touch on this, this question, but it was around, we are not to apply with twin cities. Those are the cities who are already in some kind of relationship. We can apply with other cities. Very confusing messaging. So I think we did touch on that, but maybe we want to just go over it again just to be sure everyone understood.
The cities you're applying with are not your twins. They are partner pilot cities. So if you are in touch with potential twins, they should not apply with you. They should apply to the call for twin cities. Maybe it's clearer this way.
Yeah, I think that clears it up. Yeah. So there's a few more questions coming now, which is good. So what is the duration of project for implementation?
2 years.
Great. This one's got 2 up likes. So what will the actual application look like? Will it be a questionnaire similar to the one for the mission, for the EOI for the mission?
It will be a questionnaire, a form that would reflect everything that you can find in the guidelines. So the guidelines will be translated into a form.
Great. And then I'm not sure if you will have a clear answer on this one at this exact moment, but is there a view on UK cities participating given the current situation?
Well, it's a call under age 2020,
yeah.
So
okay.
You're good to go.
And just to follow up to that last question, the second last question around the type of application in the chat here, how long will be the proposal? I presume that means part of the application, number of words / pages.
Don't have that number to mind. So I can't really answer that just yet. The call form is being designed, and as Joanna says, it will reflect directly the assessment criteria and the content that we are, or effectively what we're asking you for in the core guidelines. I don't have a word count or page number at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay. And then I think building on the question around the 2 years. So, and this is a fair question. So 2 years for implementing change in policy seems tough. Could you elaborate on this? What's expected?
Well, I would like to say, and please we'll add to this because I will certainly forget parts of what I'm thinking about, but we only have 2 years indeed, but we do not consider this as standard research or technical projects. We do not think that you should look at it as a delineated activity completely a part of what you're trying to do in your city, in your pathway to climate neutrality. We want to help you with those steps that seem particularly complicated or complex or uncertain, to create a space for you to experiment with this. So agreed 2 years for policy change may seem a lot, but it's a process that we would like to partly support. And we won't expect from you to have, if it's a policy change, to have everything in place at the end, but rather to present this part of the process that seem relevant to what we are looking for. So what that can bring learning for you and for other cities in Europe on how to approach these questions. Also, we will bring expertise, as I said, to work together, peer-to-peer learnings and exchanges. And it's just part of your journey, I suppose. And this is the most important part. I don't know, Will, would you like to add to what I said? Because I certainly forgot about something.
No, I mean, it's a very good question. And I think I don't really have anything substantive to add to what you said, just other than to reinforce that in 2 years with the money available, we're not expecting entire system transformation. It is part of your journey. This is grant funding and wider package of support to help you to test and experiment with different pathways towards decarbonisation. So it's not going to ultimately result in your absolute decarbonisation because it's not enough time, it's not enough money. But if you have particular challenges at a city level which are in your way for the city to become decarbonised by 2030, 2040, whatever it is your ambition is, then this is the opportunity for you to test something out in that space, try to overcome a barrier, see if a policy change or some sort of regulatory framework change is what is required and will work across various different aspects of your city's emissions, or to equally find out that that isn't what will work. But that's important learning as well, both for you and for potentially similar cities in similar country or the same country that might be grappling with the same problem. Ultimately, it's not a case of if you don't succeed in having an amazing outcome with so many tons of CO2 emissions sequestered, avoided, whatever. It's not going to be a case of failure or we don't give you the last tranche of money or something. It's not about that. This is a experimenting, learning and innovation program, and there is a degree of risk involved there.
Great, good answer there. I would just say, so there was a question that I saw that disappeared, but maybe it's good just to clarify and I know we have been through this in the last webinar, but just in case we've got anyone new here. So we have the guidebook and the guidelines. Can you just again reiterate what they are and what the difference is and what the purpose of each document is?
Yeah, Joanna, I can actually, to maybe just, if I missed something here, the guidebook was published last week and is the sort of inspirational approach that we're taking through the programme to help guide your thinking in developing pilot activities to reply to this call. It contains lots of the terminology, lots of the methodological approaches, and lots of the content around how the programme will run and all the different support available to pilot cities beyond just the grant funding. The guidelines is the formal technical call document that specifies the eligible activities, the way in which we will assess and select who is eligible, what kind of activities are eligible, and all the information around the funding parameters and the likes. So it's the technical call document. So let me reiterate: core guidelines, technical call document, guidebook, inspirational support for you to develop your ideas between now and the deadline.
Great, thanks, Will. So there's a few more questions coming in, and I'm going to come back to some of them, but I just want to go back to the question we've just had here, if I can find it. Yeah, so just building on the policy question, Will and Joanna, that you just answered, I think this, just to get this one right before we move on to the next question, but so delivering a reliable / probable pathway for policy change or other slow process could be enough for a pilot project.
Well, these are the very tough questions because the devil is always is in the details, but technically, yes. Well, and then it depends on what is exactly described in the application.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a whole range of other variables, and the way in which you go about that is that your approach to doing that is as important, if not more important, than just the selection of policy as a tool or a lever itself, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay. So moving on then. So can an association of cities representing several cities from one country participate as a partner? So as one partner, I guess, within the pilot application.
Yes, of course. An association of cities can participate, can be a partner. But then please be mindful, you're an association, you'll be considered as an association, and the cities won't be pilot cities because you are not, these are not cities coming into the group, it's the network. So the network is an NGO being partner of the consortium.
That does the eligibility requirement around a city still needing to lead the bid stands. So the association would be a consortium partner rather than the lead, and there shouldn't be an absence of a city directly because that's a requirement.
Yeah, that would be the association as a legal entity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So can a cluster form of a city, university, private legal entities, etc. apply?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
As long as the city is the lead of the application.
Yeah. And here's a very valid question. Will there be translations of the guidebook / guidelines?
Well, we do not translate these documents, especially the guidelines. The language of the call, the official language is English, but we tried, and Word documents or Google Translators does wonders. So if you want, please write to us. We can share a Word version, and you can then translate it for your working purposes. But the reference document will be the one in English.
So I think there's probably 2 points to talk about in this question, but would a consortium or a single application be better received? A single city application?
We have no views on this. When it comes to perception of what we expect relevant proposals relevant to your situation as a city alone, individual city, or a group of cities. We're absolutely not having preferences. And also maybe I'll seize that opportunity to underline something that we've heard a few times already, and we are really embarrassed to hear it. And if you did as well, please note, there is absolutely no preferences for capital cities either in this call. We heard cities talking or asking us if it's true, if it was true that even if it's not in the guidelines, capital cities will, only capital cities will receive funding. No, it may happen, they will, but it will be just the result of their applications. We have no views on our preferences. We will be transparent and fair assessing the proposals and selecting the portfolio of pilot cities.
Great. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of a question. I can see one in the chat, which is about the possibility of infrastructure operator to join in a consortia. I think I'll just refer that private legal entities can partner with the primary city applicant. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so any more questions, please get them in.
Maybe we can also quickly show the email address where further questions can be sent to.
Great, so we've got no more coming in. I'll pass over back to you, Joanna, to wrap up.
Well, thank you. I know it's a lot to take on at once. So we're very grateful for the time you spend with us. We really want to make ourselves available and want to help you. Please take your time, read carefully the documentation that is out now and available, and send us questions. We will work in the meantime on the FAQ, and we'll consider your questions for the FAQ. And if we see some questions coming massively or points of misunderstanding, of lacking of clarity, we will obviously organize another Q&A session, and we'll try to address these questions live, so you can ask for more clarification. Otherwise, we wish you an excellent summer. Please read it before you go on holidays, so maybe an inspiration will rise on while you're hiking in the mountains or sailing the seas. And we will wait for you on the 5th of September to launch the call and have another session with you. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions.